The mansion loomed at the edge of town, its crumbling facade silhouetted against the dying light of the setting sun. For years it had stood abandoned, a monument to the darkness that clung to it like a second skin. The locals called it cursed, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead had long since blurred. No one went near it, not even during the day, and those who spoke of it did so in hushed tones, as if afraid the very mention of its name might awaken whatever malevolence lurked within. As a member of a small but determined paranormal investigation team, I had spent years chasing stories like this. Ghosts, poltergeists, haunted places, they were my bread and butter. But this mansion was different. It had a reputation, one that made even seasoned investigators like us hesitate. The stories were too numerous, too consistent to be easily dismissed. And that was exactly why we were here. We arrived just as the last light of day faded, leaving the mansion shrouded in darkness. There were 5 of us: Mark, the team leader, Jess, our tech specialist, Ethan, the skeptic, Rachel, the medium, and me, the historian. We were a well-oiled machine, each of us playing our part, and we'd investigated dozens of sites together. But as we stood at the mansion's front gate, I could sense the unease rippling through the group. "This place gives me the creeps," Jess muttered, adjusting the camera strapped to her shoulder. Her voice, usually full of enthusiasm, was subdued, almost nervous. "That's why we're here," Mark said, trying to sound confident, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. He was trying to keep us focused, to remind us of the job at hand, but even he couldn't hide the fact that this place was different. Rachel, usually the most composed of us, had gone pale as soon as we'd pulled up to the mansion. Her eyes were wide, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "There's something wrong here," she whispered, barely audible. "I can feel it." Ethan snorted, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, Rach. You say that about every place we visit." Rachel shot him a look that could have curdled milk, but she didn't respond. Instead, she stared at the mansion, her expression one of dread. "Let's get this over with," Mark said, pushing open the gate with a loud creak. The sound echoed in the stillness, making us all flinch. We followed him up the overgrown path, the mansion's black windows seeming to watch us, like eyes waiting for us to cross some invisible threshold. The front door was heavy, its wood swollen and cracked from years of neglect. Mark pushed it open, and we stepped inside, the air immediately growing colder. It wasn't just the temperature. It was a coldness that seeped into your bones, a feeling of being unwelcome, of being watched by something that didn't want you there. The foyer was grand, or at least it had been once. Now it was a shadow of its former self. Dust covered every surface, cobwebs hung in thick curtains from the ceiling, and the air smelled of decay and something else, something metallic and sharp. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, and a grand staircase curved up to the second floor, its steps creaking ominously under the weight of time. As we set up our equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I scanned the room, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the dark, oppressive silence that seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. Mark, ever the professional, started giving instructions. "Jess, set up the cameras in the main rooms. Ethan, get the EMF readers going. Rachel, see if you can get any readings. Let's try to cover as much ground as we can before midnight." We all nodded, though none of us spoke. There was a tension in the air that made even the simplest tasks feel like monumental efforts. As Jess and I worked on setting up the cameras, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that we had made a terrible mistake by coming here. The first sign of trouble came almost immediately. As Jess was positioning a camera in the dining room, she suddenly froze, her eyes fixed on a spot in the corner. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I paused, listening. At first there was nothing, just the sound of our breathing. Then faintly, I heard it. A low whisper, so soft it was almost imperceptible. It was a voice, speaking words I couldn't understand, but there was something in the tone that sent a shiver down my spine. "Probably just the wind," I said, though I didn't believe it. Jess didn't look convinced either, but she didn't argue. We finished setting up the camera and moved on, but the whispering followed us, growing louder, more insistent. Rachel, meanwhile, was having her own issues. She had been walking through the house, trying to pick up on any spiritual activity, when she suddenly stopped dead in her tracks, her face going ashen. "There's something here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Something evil." Ethan rolled his eyes, but even he looked nervous. "You always say that, Rach. Let's just stick to the plan." But Rachel shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "No, this is different. It's like the house itself is alive. It's watching us." The idea was absurd, but as I looked around at the dark, looming walls, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was right. There was something about this place, something malevolent, something that was aware of us. As the night wore on, the house began to show its true nature. The first sign was the shifting rooms. We were in the library setting up another camera when Mark decided to check on the others. He left the room, but moments later he came back, his face pale. "I can't find the dining room," he said, his voice shaking. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "I mean, it's gone. The hallway just changed. I walked down it, and the door wasn't there anymore." I didn't know what to say. The house couldn't just change, could it? But as we all moved into the hallway to investigate, it became clear that it could. The layout had shifted, the doors and passages rearranged as if the house were some kind of living puzzle. The whispering grew louder, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was as if the house itself was whispering to us, taunting us, leading us deeper into its twisted, ever-changing maze. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and the temperature dropped even further, our breath visible in the cold, damp air. Then came the voices. They started out as faint murmurs like the whispers, but soon they became clearer, more distinct. They were voices of the dead, or so it seemed, pleading, crying, warning us to leave. But there was something else in those voices too, something darker, a malevolence that chilled me to the core. It wasn't long before the first of us cracked. Ethan, the skeptic, who had always been the one to dismiss any talk of the supernatural, suddenly snapped. He started shouting, insisting that we had to leave, that we were all in danger. His fear was palpable, and it spread through the group like wildfire. But leaving wasn't an option anymore. The house wouldn't let us. Every door we tried led to another room, another corridor. The front door, which we had left open as an escape route, was gone, replaced by a solid wall of stone. The house had sealed itself, trapping us inside. And then the entities began to appear. At first, they were just shadows, flickering at the edges of our vision, impossible to pin down. But soon they became more substantial, figures that lurked in the corners of the rooms, watching us with hollow, empty eyes. They were twisted, monstrous, their forms distorted by whatever dark forces had brought them into being. Rachel was the first to see them clearly. She screamed, pointing at a figure that stood in the doorway of the library, a tall, gaunt man with sunken eyes and a mouth that seemed to stretch too wide. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes? There was something wrong with his eyes, something that made me want to look away but also drew me in, like the pull of a black hole. "He's the one," Rachel gasped. "The one who summoned them, the one who brought this evil into the house." She was right. As I stared at the figure, I knew she was right. This was the occultist, the man who had once owned this mansion, who had delved into forbidden rituals in a quest for immortality. But instead of finding eternal life, he had unleashed something far worse, something that had consumed him and twisted the house into its current form. The man moved towards us, his steps slow and deliberate. As he approached, the walls seemed to close in, the darkness thickening around us. The others backed away, but I was frozen in place, unable to tear my eyes from the figure. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and clawed, and as he touched my arm, I felt a surge of cold so intense it was like being plunged into ice. I screamed, the sound echoing through the house. The others tried to pull me away, but the figure held on, his grip tightening. I could feel him drawing something from me. My strength, my will, my very essence. It was as if he was draining my life, feeding on it. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The figure released me, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The others dragged me away, their faces white with fear. But the damage was done. I could feel it, deep inside. Something had changed. Something had been taken from me. And I knew with a sick certainty that I was now part of the house. The rest of the night was a blur of terror and confusion. The house continued to shift and change, leading us deeper into its heart. The entities grew more numerous, more aggressive, their twisted forms closing in on us. We tried to fight them, but it was futile. The house was alive, and it wanted us. By dawn, there were only 2 of us left, Mark and me. The others had been taken, swallowed by the darkness, their screams still echoing in my ears. We were in the basement now, the walls lined with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dim light. It was here that the occultist had performed his rituals, here that he had summoned the demons that now controlled the house. Mark was delirious, his mind shattered by the horrors we had witnessed. He kept muttering about the symbols, about how they were the key to stopping the house, to breaking its hold on us. But I knew it was too late. The house had already claimed us. We were part of it now, just like the entities that haunted its halls. As the first light of day filtered through the cracks in the walls, I felt the house shift one last time. The walls closed in, the darkness consuming everything. Mark's voice was cut off, his final scream swallowed by the void. And then there was nothing, just the cold, suffocating darkness. I don't know how long I've been here, in this place between life and death. The house still stands, its dark presence a blight on the edge of town, but I am no longer part of the living world. I am trapped within its walls, a prisoner of the darkness. I can hear the whispers, the voices of those who have come before me, those who have been consumed by the house. I can feel the presence of the occultist, his twisted soul still seeking the immortality that eludes him. And I can see the entities, the twisted forms of those who have been taken, their souls bound to the house for eternity. And I know that soon someone else will come. Someone else will hear the stories, feel the pull of the house, and they will come to investigate. And when they do, the house will be waiting, its hunger never sated, its darkness never full. And I will be here, watching, waiting, part of the darkness now, forever and always. The town of Willow Creek was the kind of place that seemed to exist on the fringes of reality, a forgotten speck on the map where time moved a little slower and the world beyond its borders felt like a distant dream. I'd lived there my whole life, as had my parents and their parents before them. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other's business, where secrets were whispered but never spoken aloud. And at the heart of every whispered secret was the forest. The forest stretched like a dark, looming shadow on the outskirts of town. Its trees were ancient, their twisted limbs reaching out like gnarled fingers. The locals called it the Whispers, a name passed down through generations, and everyone knew to stay far away once the sun dipped below the horizon. The stories varied. Some said the forest was cursed, Others claimed it was haunted by the spirits of the damned. But one thing was certain: those who entered the whispers after dark never came back the same, if they came back at all. It was the kind of legend that would have been easy to dismiss as small-town superstition, if not for the fact that I had grown up hearing the same story over and over again from people who swore it was true. I knew people who had lost loved ones to the whispers, friends who had vanished one night, leaving nothing behind but a hollow echo of their laughter and a town full of unanswered questions. That's why, on that fateful night, when my friends and I found ourselves drunk on cheap beer and youthful bravado, it seemed like a good idea to prove ourselves against the legend. There were 5 of us: Tommy, Mike, Rachel, Emily, and me. We were young, stupid, and eager to show the world that we weren't afraid of some old ghost story. The forest was just trees, we told ourselves. What could it do to us? We gathered at the edge of the woods, the moon hanging low and full in the sky, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. Tommy, always the ringleader, grinned at us, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and alcohol-fueled recklessness. "Come on," he said. "Let's see what all the fuss is about." Mike laughed, clapping Tommy on the back. "Yeah, let's show these trees who's boss." Rachel and Emily exchanged nervous glances, but neither wanted to be the one to back out. I should have said something then, should have stopped them, but the booze had dulled my instincts, and I didn't want to be the coward of the group. So with a shrug, I followed them into the darkness. The first thing I noticed as we stepped into the forest was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful, gentle quiet of nature. It was a heavy, oppressive silence that pressed down on us like a weight. The kind of silence that made you hyper-aware of your own breathing, of the sound of your heart pounding in your chest. We walked deeper into the woods, our footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves, the beam of Tommy's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches knitting together to form a canopy that blotted out the moonlight. The further we went, the more the world outside the forest seemed to fade away, until it was just us and the trees. It started out as a faint sound, so soft I thought I was imagining it at first, a whisper, just on the edge of hearing. I glanced around, expecting to see one of my friends playing a trick, but they all looked as uneasy as I felt. "Did you hear that?" Rachel asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Mike replied, but his bravado had faltered. He was listening now, too. The whispering grew louder, though still faint, as if the forest itself was breathing around us. The voices were indistinct, a cacophony of murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere at once, slipping between the trees, curling around us like smoke. "Let's turn back," Emily said, her voice shaking. "This isn't right." But Tommy, ever the daredevil, just laughed. "It's just the wind," he said, though even he didn't sound so sure anymore. "We've come this far, haven't we?" And so we kept going, driven by a mix of fear and the stubbornness that only teenagers possess. But the deeper we went, the more the whispers grew. They weren't just sounds anymore. They were words, half-formed, slipping into my mind like poison. "Come closer. Don't leave. Stay with us." They were pleading, desperate, but there was something else beneath the surface, something malevolent, a hunger that made my skin crawl. I wanted to stop, to turn back, but it was as if the forest had taken hold of me, of all of us, pulling us deeper, deeper into its heart. Rachel was the first to snap. She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with terror, her hands clutching her head as if trying to block out the voices. "They're in my head," she whimpered. "I can't make it stop, please." "Rachel, calm down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but my own fear was clawing at my insides. The whispers had found their way into my mind too, gnawing at my thoughts, filling my head with images of darkness, of pain, of endless, suffocating night. Rachel didn't calm down. She let out a scream, a sound so raw and primal it echoed through the trees, silencing the whispers for just a moment. And then she turned and ran, her footsteps pounding against the forest floor, her breath coming in panicked gasps. "Rachel, wait!" Emily shouted, but it was too late. Rachel was gone, swallowed by the shadows. Tommy swore under his breath and took off after her, with Mike close behind. Emily and I followed, the cold tendrils of fear wrapping tighter around my chest with each step. The forest had changed. It wasn't just trees anymore. The ground seemed to shift beneath our feet, the trees twisting and warping as if they were alive, as if the forest itself was reshaping to keep us trapped within. We ran for what felt like hours, but the forest only seemed to grow darker, more twisted, the whispers now a constant presence, their voices urgent, insistent, promising things I didn't want to understand. I could feel them pulling at my mind, fraying the edges of my sanity. We found Rachel eventually. She was standing in a small clearing, her back to us, her head tilted to one side, as if listening to something only she could hear. "Rachel?" Tommy called, his voice shaky. "Rachel, what the hell are you doing?" She didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear us. As we got closer, I saw that her eyes were wide open, unblinking, her lips moving as if she were talking to herself, but no sound came out. "Rachel, we need to go," Emily cried. But when she reached out to touch Rachel's shoulder, Rachel turned to face us, and the look in her eyes made my blood run cold. Her face was twisted into a grotesque smile, her eyes wide and unseeing, and when she spoke, her voice was flat, lifeless, as if it didn't belong to her anymore. "They're coming," she said, the words sending a shiver down my spine. "They're coming for all of us." We didn't have time to react before the shadows moved. They erupted from the trees, dark, amorphous shapes that swirled around us like a living storm. The whispers grew louder, a deafening roar that filled my head, drowning out all thought. I could feel them now, not just in my mind but on my skin, cold, clawing hands that pulled at me, tearing at my clothes, my flesh. Tommy and Mike tried to fight them off, swinging wildly at the shadows, but it was like fighting smoke. The more they struggled, the more the darkness closed in around them, swallowing them whole. I heard their screams, saw their bodies twisted and contorted as the shadows dragged them down into the earth, and then there was nothing, just silence. Emily grabbed my hand, her grip so tight it hurt. "We have to get out of here," she said, her voice trembling. "We have to—" But I could see it in her eyes. She knew, just as I did, that there was no escape. The forest had us now, and it wasn't going to let us go. We ran, or at least tried to, but the shadows were everywhere, the trees closing in around us, the ground shifting beneath our feet. The whispers were in my head, in my soul, filling me with a despair so deep it was like drowning in darkness. "Stay with us. Join us. Forever." Emily stumbled, and I tried to pull her to her feet, but she was sobbing now, her strength gone, her mind shattered by the relentless onslaught of the voices. I could feel the darkness closing in around us, the shadows reaching out with cold, hungry hands. I don't know what happened next. There was a flash of light, a blinding pain, and then nothing. When I woke up, I was lying on the ground at the edge of the forest, the first light of dawn just beginning to break over the horizon. The forest was silent again, the whispers gone, the shadows retreating back into the darkness where they belonged. But I was alone. There was no sign of Emily, of Tommy, Mike, or Rachel. Just me lying there in the dirt, my mind a shattered mess of broken memories and nightmares. They never found the others. The search parties combed the forest for days, but there was nothing, no bodies, no footprints, no trace of them at all. It was as if they had never existed. I wish I could say that I didn't remember what happened in the whispers that night, that it was all just a bad dream, but I remember everything. The voices, the shadows, the way the forest came alive, twisted and hungry. A portal to something beyond this world, something dark and eternal. I've tried to forget, tried to move on, but the whispers are still with me, always just on the edge of hearing, waiting for me to listen. I know now that the forest is a portal, a gateway to another realm, and the voices we heard were the souls of those trapped between worlds, damned to an eternity of darkness and torment. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the darkness presses in around me, I can still hear them. The whispers, calling me back to the forest, back to the place where it all began. And one day, I know I'll answer them. When I first moved into the dorms at Lakeview University, I was excited about the independence and new experiences college life promised. My dorm room was small but cozy, and I was looking forward to making it my own. Little did I know I would be sharing it with someone, or something, I could never have imagined. It started subtly. My books would be in different places than where I had left them, and the lights would flicker occasionally. At first, I blamed it on my own forgetfulness and the old wiring in the building. But as the days turned into weeks, the disturbances became more frequent and harder to ignore. One evening, I returned to my room after a long day of classes to find my textbooks scattered across the floor. I distinctly remembered stacking them neatly on my desk before leaving. Annoyed, I picked them up and put them back in order, trying to convince myself that I must have knocked them over in my rush that morning. That night, as I was studying for an upcoming exam, the lights began to flicker again. This time they didn't stop. The overhead light buzzed and dimmed, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I got up to check the bulb, but it seemed fine. Then the room grew cold, so cold I could see my breath. A chill ran down my spine, and I had the unsettling feeling that I was not alone. "Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, but the flickering stopped abruptly, and the room returned to its normal temperature. I tried to brush it off as a power surge, but deep down, I knew something strange was happening. The next day, I decided to ask around. My neighbor, Lisa, was a sophomore and had lived in the dorms the previous year. She seemed like a good person to start with. "Hey, Lisa, have you ever noticed anything weird about these dorms?" I asked casually, trying not to sound paranoid. Lisa's eyes widened slightly, and she hesitated before responding. "What do you mean by weird? Like things moving on their own, lights flickering, cold spots, that kind of stuff?" She glanced around to make sure no one was listening and leaned in closer. "You haven't heard about room 213, have you?" I shook my head, my curiosity piqued. "No, what about it?" Lisa sighed and lowered her voice. "A couple of years ago, a girl named Emily lived in that room. She was a quiet, studious type, always keeping to herself. One night, there was an accident. She fell out of the window and died. Some say it was an accident, others think it might have been something else. Ever since then, people have reported strange things happening in that room." My heart sank. Room 213 was my room. "Do you think it's her? Emily's ghost?" Lisa shrugged. "I don't know. I've heard stories, but I've never experienced anything myself. Just be careful, okay?" That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of Emily. What had really happened to her? And why was she still here? Around midnight, I heard a soft whisper. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then it came again, clearer this time. "Help me." I sat up, my heart pounding. "Emily? Is that you?" The room grew cold again, and the lights flickered. A shadowy figure appeared at the foot of my bed. It was a girl, her face pale and eyes wide with sorrow. "Help me," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Find my diary," she said, her form flickering like the lights. "It's hidden. It will explain everything." Before I could ask where to look, she vanished, and the room returned to normal. I was left sitting there, my mind reeling. Emily wanted me to find her diary. But where could it be? The next day, I searched every inch of my room, looking for any hiding spots. I checked under the bed, in the closet, behind the desk. Anywhere a small book might be hidden. After hours of searching, I found nothing. Frustrated and exhausted, I slumped on the floor, feeling defeated. Then I remembered the loose floorboard I had noticed when I first moved in. It had seemed insignificant at the time, but now I had a hunch. I pried it up with a screwdriver, and sure enough, there was a small leather-bound diary hidden beneath the floor. I opened it with trembling hands. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with Emily's neat handwriting. Her entries started off normal enough, detailing her classes, friends, and everyday life. But as I read further, the entries grew darker and more disturbing. Emily wrote about feeling watched, about hearing whispers and seeing shadows. She felt a malevolent presence in the room, something that wanted to harm her. She tried to tell people, but no one believed her. They thought she was just stressed or imagining things. Her last entry was a frantic plea for help, written the night she died. "I'm not crazy. It's real. It's here. If something happens to me, it's not an accident. Please, someone believe me." Tears blurred my vision as I read her desperate words. Emily had been terrified, and no one had listened. I had to do something to help her, to let her find peace. That night I called out to her again. "Emily, I found your diary. I know what happened to you." Her figure appeared once more, her expression one of relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "I need you to do one more thing." "What is it?" I asked, willing to do anything to help her. "There's a box hidden in the attic. It has the proof. Please find it and show them. They need to know." The next day I climbed up to the attic, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. After searching through the dust and cobwebs, I found an old metal box hidden behind some forgotten trunks. Inside were photographs, letters, and a small tape recorder. The photographs showed Emily with a young man, both of them smiling and happy. The letters were love notes between them, but they also hinted at a darker side. The young man was possessive, jealous, and had threatened Emily when she tried to end the relationship. With trembling hands, I played the tape. Emily's voice came through, shaky but determined. She described her fear of the young man, his threats, and how she believed he was responsible for the strange occurrences in her room. The tape ended with her pleading for help. Armed with this new evidence, I went to the campus authorities. At first, they were skeptical, but the diary and tape convinced them to reopen the case. After a thorough investigation, it was revealed that the young man had indeed been stalking Emily. On the night she died, he had broken into her room, and in the struggle she had fallen out of the window. With the truth finally revealed, Emily's story was told, and her spirit found peace. The strange occurrences in my room ceased, and the cold spots and flickering lights became a thing of the past. I stayed in that room for the rest of the semester, feeling a strange connection to Emily. I often thought about her, hoping she had found the peace she deserved. Her story was a tragic one, but it was a reminder that even in the darkest times, the truth must come to light. Years later, as I look back on that time, I realize how much it changed me. I learned to listen, to believe, and to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Emily's story became a part of me, a ghostly reminder of the silent roommate who had once shared my room.